talked about geopolitics and the idea that some countries want to return to a world where it's power that rules, the power of the strongest. And in fact, energy is often seen as that power. And certainly energy has always been at the very center of geopolitics, now more than ever. We're hearing drill, baby, drill, coming from the US. We're also seeing the US roll back both its global development cooperation efforts and its participation in global decarbonization. How concerned are you that this golden era of renewable energy that we thought we were in is suddenly coming to an end?
Actually, not at all. Because there are tipping points in climate which are horrible, like melting or ice, which will never be returning at the polar circles, but there are also tipping points in investment. And we have invested globally so much into renewable energy. Also, actually, and we had that also in our election campaigns here in Germany, companies invested so much into carbon neutral technologies that if we would turn everything back, there were stranded investments of trillions around the world. So obviously, we are not safe 100%. I mean, we know in these times nothing is obviously safe for 100% anymore. But I would say, especially for Europeans, but also for Africans and many different regions in the world, this is also a time when others say we are shying away, that we are saying then we double our investments, not only for climate reasons, for doing good in the world, but also for economic reasons. And our goal as a European Union is to now even become faster the first climate neutral continent in the world, because we believe that the future growth is heavily depending on that. And if we see the examples from around the world, also in my own country, 15 years ago, we discussed also here in more rural areas where actually I live, further down in the south of Berlin, there was an old lignite mining sites. And people were discussing, can we really do it? What does it mean for social welfare? What does it mean for job employment? And we have seen, if we are doing these investments on the other side of Berlin, it's the same state, we call it Brandenburg there. We have now one of the biggest wind power companies, also for all over Europe, Enatrag. It's the European champion in wind power. They invested 4 billion in renewable energy over 25 years. In the beginning, everybody was saying these are the green dreamers, but now they are securing our energy, especially when we were phasing out of Russian oil and gas. And they are supplying 1 million households with renewable energy. They have a workforce of 1,200, but also from there, they are kind of controlling many wind parks all around Europe. And there are thousands of these kind of examples all around the world. And because you named also the US, also in the US. And I wonder what, for example, Texas will do. I mean, it has been one of the biggest oil and gas producers since 1940, but now it has become also the front runner of green energy. I've been there in September 2023, but I look at the numbers that I tell them correctly. Since 2019, Texas energy firms have boosted solar generation capacity by 800%. Doubled wind capacity. And the question, if they will all just put that aside, with all these stranded investments, I really have my doubts. So therefore, the question of combining green investments, and if they don't call them green investment anymore, but somehow other investments, but really seeing the economic benefit of these sites, my answer was this clear yes in the beginning. Yes, I think we have reached a good tipping point in these times that the only way forward is green and therefore clean energy.
Let's hear whether that resonates with IRENA. I know, Francesco, that IRENA presented some new figures today, figures that reflect data. It's on. Data that you have put together for the upcoming G20+. So tell us what they say to us about the era of renewable energy.
So naturally, just preliminary number, because we are talking about the last year. But again, we have a new record of renewable installed capacity, 585 gigawatts, more or less. Last year were 473 gigawatts. So it's clear where we are going. Though we have seen also amazing progress also in the US. The US have installed 50% more in 1 year than the previous year. Germany, 15–20% more than the previous year. So I think there is no reason to be afraid. As Annalena said very clearly, we have reached a tipping point where it is not possible to go back. And these numbers say also that, unfortunately, this progress is unequal, mainly China, European Union, US. I think good results also in India. India is more than double the renewable installed capacity at year base compared to the previous year. So all the numbers are going in a certain direction, but we have Africa, Southeast Asia that has been left behind. And this is very dangerous things because these are the two regions where we expect more demands of energy coming in the next years. One other aspect, and then I will end up my first intervention, is that we also, it's clear that we are doing well, but not doing enough. What I'm trying to say, not the occasion that you have, also when the old centralized energy system based on fossil fuel took place, replacing the previous one, it takes more than 100 years, and still there is people that is lacking electricity. So the problem is that we have to understand that there is no doubt where we are going. We will have a new energy system, largely based on renewables, complemented by the sustainable use of biomass and hydrogen, mainly green hydrogen. The problem is that we are facing the climate change menace. So the question is the speed. The most important variable that we have to confront is time. So if there is no doubt where we are going, the data say that we are half of what we needed, and next year, towards 2030, will be more difficult. Was something around 1,050 this year. Next year, we need to go for 1,100 gigawatts. So time is there, and naturally, what has been said about the geopolitics question, it cannot revert the path, but unfortunately, there is the possibility of a slowdown. So it's important everyone work to make things happening faster and faster and faster.
And of course, that is why IRENA has started numerous initiatives, including the Energy Transition Accelerator Finance Platform and APRA as well. And APRA, actually, the Accelerated Partnership for Renewables in Africa, was our very first topic today at the beginning of our day, Kevin Kariuki. And we concluded, and again, this is something that has repeatedly been documented by your bank as well as by IRENA, that far too low a share of global financial flows, which in fact are surging into renewables, but far too little is going to Africa. So if we look at Africa in the context of this, let's say, rising multipolar system, if we can even still call it a system or an order, what would you say, where is Africa today?
Thank you very much. I think in order to contextualize this correctly, I want to reiterate what we all know, that first of all, Africa has abundant renewable energy sources. I think the estimates are that Africa accounts for 60% of the base solar potential globally, estimated about 10 terawatts, that's 10,000 gigawatts. And then you have huge hydro, huge wind, and so on and so forth. But the biggest challenge, and as La Camera just said, Africa accounts for very little in terms of investments. In renewables alone, just to be precise and to quote IRENA numbers, I don't know that these are still accurate, Africa accounted for only 2% of global energy investments, renewable energy investments, which is a tragedy. Because we see that Africa can actually become a significant player in the global world as far as renewable energy is concerned. Whether it is a question of exporting molecules in terms of ammonia or green hydrogen, or even exporting electrons. I am aware of a number of very important interconnectors that are being considered by the private sector. There are 2 interconnectors from Algeria and Tunisia connecting to Italy, and I'm also aware of an interconnector between Morocco and the UK and Spain. And all these are made from renewables. But the challenge is today is that there is this issue about perceived risk. So first of all, although the resources, as La Camera says, Africa accounts for only a very small percentage, even that money that comes in, is the capital cost is at least 3 times what obtains elsewhere. And that's why, as a bank, we have we are making strenuous efforts to ensure that we are able to bring in bankable projects that are able to reduce the cost of financing. And here I must thank Germany. We have what we call the Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa. Germany has supported us in kickstarting that process. And that particular effort, just to give you an idea, will be able to mobilize about $500 million of project preparation and project development capital in order to mobilize about $10 billion of investments. But I think the biggest effort that we are doing right now with the World Bank is what we call Mission 300. And Mission 300 seeks to provide new electricity access to 300 million people by 2030. But the significant thing from a renewable investment perspective is the fact that what we are saying is that in order to be able to mobilize this kind of resources, we want reforms. And one of the key pillars of these reforms is to ensure that we have a private sector oriented sort of reforms so that we are able to attract investments at the quantities and at the speed that is required in order to meet, first of all, to meet the demand growth in the first instance, and also to encourage investments on the continent, even if it is for purposes of exporting power, for example, to Europe. Let me stop there for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's do a quick second round to talk a little bit about best practices, because we agreed here today in one of our panels that nothing succeeds like success. Showing what can be done is a way of stimulating more. So let me ask all of you if you can share a couple of standout examples, and I'll start, if I may, with Francesco. IRENA does host the Partnerships Secretariat for APRA, for the Accelerated Partnership for Renewables. So perhaps it's an APRA example about how we can mobilize more capital for investment in renewables in Africa, but maybe it lies somewhere else in how we bring down capital costs and boost investment. So whatever strikes your mind as a good example.
So when we talk about the cost of capital, the capital is the fever. When you got a fever, it's a symptom of something else. So we have not to look at the symptom, we have to look at the cause of it. So why is it so difficult to invest in Africa, first of all? Naturally, there is this de-risk. The de-risking that is very important. But there is one element that must be clear. It will be impossible to proceed at the speed and the scale needed in Africa if we don't invest in the infrastructure. So the infrastructure is the main barrier to go faster in renewables in Africa. This has to be clear. We have sent this message now from a few years. We have been heard concerning the tripling, and this is enough for the time being. But I think that we have called it that we need the multilateral financial institutions to put in their reform process not only the fact that the decision-making process should be more inclusive is okay, more concessional loans and grants is okay, but focus on what they have to do. And we think that building the infrastructure for the new energy system should be the first task of the multilateral financial institutions. Also them, they don't have the resources for doing that. But if there is a clear plan, it will be much easier to attract the interest of the private utilities and invest together. So I think this is, I hope that before or later, in the spring meetings this year, perhaps this argument, because everyone now is speaking about the grids, everyone. It was not so 3-4 years ago where IRENA was a lonely voice. But now it's evident that this is there and has to be solved. This means that APRA is a very interesting initiative, but should be also, see what APRA can do. APRA can do to enhance, sending first a message, because 7 countries in the beginning started to say that they want to go for renewables. Now they are 11. First there will be 15. So we have been able to change through APRA the narrative in Africa. And this is important. Do you remember that a couple of years ago that we are talking about transitional fuel, et cetera, et cetera. Now they are talking about renewables. And this, I think, is important to do. APRA could be a very important element of the Mission 300. But again, and I close because I've been too long. I've been also today, I've been provocative in the other occasion. But you really think that you can solve the problem of access to energy to people, providing a small grid when the people has not the money to pay the few cents for the electricity? There's no stand. So if you are not able to link the idea of development with the building of the new energy system, we will fail. So we have to find a way to get the people the revenue for paying the tariff, and the work will be different. And I close with the usual example that I do. After the Second World War, Europe was like Africa. Without the investment in the infrastructure, coming from the friends from the Western world, now we are not having 4 European countries in the G7. This has to be done for Africa. This has to be done for Southeast Asia. If we don't do that, we are going to fail.
In fact, we heard an Assistant Secretary General from the UN and leader in UNDP tell us today we have to link the energy transition not only with development, but with fighting inequality. Yeah. And let me go to the Minister to ask what role collaboration plays in that. You talked about the tripling up and doubling down goals that we signed up to at COP28. And one of the things we agreed on here again and again today is that even in the face of a geopolitical context that seems to be all about competition, we must continue to collaborate to reach those pledges. So how do you see that, and how do you see Germany's role going forward?
To be an enabler. I mean, we don't have to convince anybody anymore to say, let's go green. But I think the most important questions being raised at the last climate conferences were those from countries, ministers, heads of state saying, well, don't preach to us, provide us the grids, provide us the capabilities. And I think this is really important, especially for those who are anyhow convinced to understand that, especially from countries which cannot just mobilize like we did, 500 billion in our constitution, they told me we cannot go home and promise to triple renewable energy, even though we know if we're not doing it, our island will die, because people also in our country asked us, so how do you deliver? So if we do not give everybody the tools, the technical tools, but also the money in their hand, all the partners we are having thing, and there are more than 160 countries, they will sign whatever climate treaty there is because they know that the climate crisis is about the future of their own country. But if they do not have the capability, even the most convinced are not capable, especially in democracies, to deliver. And therefore, all these projects, like Kevin mentioned the one, APRA, where Germany is really active, they are also projects we are doing not only for green energy, not only for energy security, but also for strengthening societies, strengthening democracies. And in this understanding, I'm also with Francesco. This is my second point where Germany is engaging. We are heavily engaging, and this is also my call to the new government, in the reform of the World Bank and the IMF. The money is there, but it has to go to the countries which really need it, and it has to go to the green investments. And I would like to say something also again for reflecting ourselves. I mean, it's not about if green energies are into grids or infrastructure, these are not capable of being corrupt. Or if it's not about a money or power game, because we have seen also from investments, and for example from China, if they have debts with these countries, you can also tell a country, now I paid for your whole national grid, and now you owe me something for something else when we talk about security and peace in the world. So the question of the infrastructure and mobilizing money for the infrastructure, again, is also a major role for international institutions, because otherwise we will have new dependencies. And understanding this, I think, is so important for this geopolitical connection. And this is why we are lobbying so much of bringing down the interest rates, of bringing down the project's cost. And because it hasn't been named yet on the panel, and you asked for a good example, there is this Green Guarantee Group. Germany is sharing it together with Nigeria. Again, very important to have this European-African co-chair, which is exactly pointed at this, bringing down the capital costs. And if I may, a last example from the local level again, because you have to also engage people and not from Germany. Again, I'm jumping to the US and jumping especially to the state of Texas. There is a county, it's called Oldham County. It has only 1,700 inhabitants, and they had a huge problem with school finance, talking about Texas and everything else, but this is their issue in the United States. But because they invested into a new wind farm, and they did a similar thing what we are also doing in Germany since a couple of years, saying to really convince the local community they have to benefit from this renewable energy project. So they did in Texas the same as we are doing now also here in Eastern Germany. They said 3/4 of the revenue will provide the new school funding. So they built windmills, and by that also a new school, especially for those who cannot afford normally private schools. And combining these two things, again, I think would be a great example. It's also especially for regions in the world where it's not only poverty, but speaking about Africa, it has the best sites for solar, but it's also the continent where 600 million people do not have access at the moment for any kind of electricity. So bringing the two together, I think, would be the best projects we could invest in.
Thank you very much. And by the way, green guarantees did come up a number of times in today's discussions for a lot of praise as well. Kevin Kariuki, pick up on the point that we just heard from the minister, if you would, in regard to multilateral development partners, agility and flexibility. What reforms do you think would help, especially multilateral development banks, to be more able to get money into project organizers and governments' hands when it comes to financing the green energy transition? We've heard lots of calls here today for blended and concessional finance. And as Annalena Baerbock said, the money is there, but it doesn't always flow and it doesn't always get absorbed. What do we need to change?
I think one of the things I want to say here is that in the course of our involvement with the World Bank in Mission 300, one of the things that is a must is that the governments and the minister has just mentioned here that there is not, they have 600 million people who don't have access to electricity. It is also important that the resources of the World Bank, the resources of the African Development Bank is actually their resources. So they must be able to commit in their policies that to prioritize electricity access or energy access in order to be able to develop those projects. I always say until a government considers it important that we need to prioritize energy and therefore earmark the resources that have been made available by the World Bank, by the African Development Bank, then there will be no translation of the need for energy into projects. So that's that number one. But number two, I think what the minister is talking about is real. And what this is saying, we need to find creative ways of being able to use the resources that are available to expand, to be able to reach more people. And one of the things this is one area that the African Development Bank has done extremely well. When it comes to hybrid capital, we were the first people to do hybrid capital sort of amongst the MDBs. And that is huge. And the second other area is the issue of what we call the special drawing rights. I know there are challenges, but we've worked with the Inter-American Development Bank, and we found a solution that could actually be able to enable that the special drawing rights to be channeled through MDBs and therefore increase the path for the resources. And in so doing, for example, if we had X amount of special drawing rights, using the mechanisms that are there within us, we can be able to sort of multiply by 4 times and therefore probably increase more resources. But at the end of the day, what you are interested in are the development outcomes. And I wanted to highlight, this Mission 300 effort because there are very important aspects of it that I wanted to share because I do believe here we have German investors and other people who would be interested in the energy transition. And I wanted to highlight the 5 key pillars of the Mission 300. Number 1, we talk about least cost power expansion plan of all the countries that are part of Mission 300. And in so doing, what we are saying is that we look at all the resources of energy, and as I said, Africa had huge renewable energy sources, and therefore come up with an energy plan for the country. Number 2, as La Camera also mentioned, the issue of transmission assets. We talk about generation, but we always forget that you need transmission assets, and we also want interconnectors. And number 3, we keep on saying that, by virtue, for example, of Africa's population distribution, it's very fairly interspersed. And therefore, we need to understand that there are people who will never be, for a long time, will not be able to access the grid. And therefore, you have distributed renewable energies. And what we are saying here, I think we found that almost 50% of new electricity access by 2030 will have to be through distributed renewable energies. So it's a sector that we cannot ignore. And again, what are we using? Renewable energy. And also the private sector. I've said all these huge projects that I spoke about that are meant for export of power from Africa to Europe, they are all by the private sector. And what we are saying, as part of the reforms, we must ensure that the reforms actually enable private sector participation. But finally, we must have utilities that are bankable, because without bankable utilities, then you cannot be able to have people contracting to provide power, and so on and so forth. So I think those are the 5 pillars, and I do believe that what we are doing in Mission 300 will ensure that we have reforms that will enable us to address the energy poverty on the continent in a definitive manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And in fact, we learned today that if Mission 300 is successful, by 2030, that will cut in half the number of people in Africa who don't have access to power. We have just about 1 minute left on the clock. Let me go back to the minister and ask you, if you look ahead to BETD in 2029, So right before we get to that 2030 landmark date, what would you want to be the top priority that this forum should achieve by then?
Because I'm having all my foreign ministers head here as well, I have to connect it to the peace in Europe, if I'm thinking of 2029. So Ukraine, which is at the edge of entering the European Union in 2029, being connected to a European electricity grid, which is at well, I reach now high, yeah? 80% renewable energy, so Germany has to be almost at 100% by then. And why I'm quite positive in the thinking is, if I can look back, in 2015, we had this historic climate conference in Paris. And we have a joke here in the foreign ministry, at which page was renewable energy mentioned in this treaty. And we have two documents here, and I'm always wrong with the document. It was only mentioned once, renewable energy, and only related to Africa. And now we are 10 years later, yeah, and the world has decided 2 years ago that the future is renewable for everybody. So in 10 years, we have achieved together a revolution. So in 4 years' time, in 5 years' time, we have to achieve half of a revolution. And this means we are way ahead on this goal of making Europe the first climate neutral continent, and then also in a Europe of peace for everybody.
Minister, thank you very much for that optimistic closing message here. And thank you very much to Kevin Kariuki, to Francesco La Camera for joining this discussion. And
Can I say what?
Of course.
What I want for 29 to happen here?
Yes.
I want to have Baerbock and Baerbock here with us.
In whichever capacity you may join. Thank you very, very much to all three of you for this wonderful discussion. And just before we do close today, let me say once again that we are very, very grateful to both ministers for all that you have done over the last 3.5 years to expand this as a forum for such powerful and important exchange.